Hey everyone. Today I want to walk you through two of the biggest pitfalls that I see with a DIY approach to SIBO treatment. And this is going to build on my last video where I walked you through the SIBO SOS recovery roadmap. So we're going to dive into really the top half of that flowchart today and talk again about the two big challenges with DIY, the DIY approach to SIBO treatment. And the first challenge has to do with the fact that DIY does not follow a systematic protocol. And the second challenge is that the DIY approach does not work with a qualified doctor. Qualified meaning someone who has experience treating SIBO. So if you're unfamiliar with the SIBO SOS recovery roadmap, I encourage you to go back, see that last video of mine. That's going to give you a good understanding, a good landscape of what we're going to get into today. But for those of you who watched that video, you'll see that the very top of it is SIBO suspected. And so this is when you have symptoms, right? And maybe the symptoms are around bloating and gas. Maybe it's around diarrhea and constipation, right? Maybe it's around brain fog, right? Or maybe it's around just generally having like bad feelings in your tummy. There's a whole number of symptoms that are related to IBS and related to SIBO that lead people down this road of learning a little bit more about what might actually be going on in their body. And so if step one is SIBO suspected, step two is to pursue what are called the first and second line therapies. And like I said in my last video, this is oftentimes skipped right over by most people. This isn't thoroughly investigated and taken advantage of in terms of having an influence on SIBO symptoms. So the first line therapies that are described have to do with diet and lifestyle. So from a diet standpoint, it's really about what are you eating? Are you eating a healthy, balanced meal, or are you eating a bunch of junk food? When are you eating? Are you eating late at night? Are you eating all day long? Are you giving your body time to actually digest in between the periods of putting food into your body? And then how? How are you eating? Are you eating mindfully? Are you eating slowly? Are you chewing your food? Are you doing the things really in your mouth, which is where digestion starts, that will set up your whole digestive tract for success as you go? And I might also add that within diet, there are things like, are you taking vitamins? And are you drinking enough water? Things that are going to help to promote healthy and normal digestion. And from a lifestyle standpoint, the big one here is around stress, because we know that stress has a direct impact on our digestion and a direct impact on the way that things feel in our belly. But we also want to take a look at any sort of prescriptions that you might be using, things that might be impacting your stomach acid production or bile production or motility or any of the things that are going to create the conditions for overgrowth. Those are all worth looking at. And then within this too is just merely healthy routines. Are you moving your body? Are you getting out? Are you getting fresh air? Are you experiencing decent sleep? Do you have good relationships? All of these things are going to contribute to overall health, but also contribute to stress. And then the second line therapies really have to do with digestion specifically, since that's where the issue is. And this gets into enzymes, gets into bitters, gets into prebiotics and probiotics. And so if we're following the systematic protocol, then this is the very first thing that we should be doing, is when we're having belly troubles, is to go in and take a look at the diet and to take a look at the lifestyle and to take a look at digestion and take advantage of all of these things that, when they're not being done in a certain way, can negatively impact digestion and the way that your stomach feels. And things that, when done in a way that supports health, all have a very positive impact on the way that your belly feels and on your body's ability to digest. And the protocol says that only if all of this doesn't work, only after trying all of these things, do we then move down into a breath test to confirm whether there's SIBO present or not. And based on that breath test, it takes us in a number of directions. It takes us down to pharmaceutical antibiotics, to herbal antibiotics, to the elemental diet, and then over here to a SIBO-friendly diet, which isn't really for treatment, right? So I'm going to draw a little bit of a line here. The SIBO treatment is really about minimizing your discomfort and minimizing symptoms while you're going through this whole process of treatment. So if none of this works, then we move into the breath test. And what we see so often is that in some cases, based on SIBO symptoms, people might skip right over the breath test, go to the doctor, and get a prescription for Xifaxan or rifaximin, same thing. And even some doctors may be reticent or resistant to doing a breath test and may get someone right on to antibiotics. And what we see oftentimes, and I say what I see in the posts in all of the SIBO groups, is that people, they tried rifaximin and maybe they got a little bit of relief, but it wasn't sustained or it didn't work. And then they jump into maybe trying some of the herbal products that are talked about. And if that doesn't work, if there's 1 to 2 rounds of failed treatment, from there, like the conventional wisdom, and again, what so much of the crowd says is, okay, well, then you got to find your root cause. That's why the antibiotics didn't work. You got to find your root cause. But this root cause, I like to call it the root cause rabbit hole, because it's difficult to come out of this, right? So if you've gone from SIBO symptoms to maybe a breath test, to trying a couple of antibiotics, to not getting the results, to now starting to look for a root cause, you're down here, and now you're talking about doing gut map, and there's conversations about parasites. There's conversations about heavy metals, conversations about mold and air and water, right? We get into histamine, conversations about DAO enzymes, right? And the list goes on and on and on. There's so many things that you can look into here around root causes. And people oftentimes will go through, again, they've kind of come down this slide and they find that, this wasn't the problem, this wasn't the problem, this wasn't the problem, this wasn't the problem, this wasn't the problem. Or maybe they did find something and they treated that, and then it still didn't provide the relief in terms of SIBO along the way. And so the challenge here is that when none of these root causes pan out in terms of providing the relief that someone's looking for, like, that causes stress. Because where do you go from here? Right? And that stress begets more stress, which eventually begets anxiety, which eventually begets depression. And the challenge is that stress, more stress, anxiety, and depression, like all of these things, unfortunately, they make your symptoms worse. They make it harder to heal. And they create new symptoms. Whether it's the symptoms of anxiety or depression, or whether it's chronic stress taking a toll on your other organs and other bodily systems, which then sometimes create new illness. And things are just going downhill. And so, coming back to these two challenges of the DIY approach, right? The first, that we're not following a systematic protocol because we're jumping over steps that are so important. But then there's other things too that we're missing out on. One, when we don't follow the protocol, and two, when we don't work with a qualified doctor. Because when this breath test is done, it's very important to understand, are you dealing with bacterial overgrowth? Are you dealing with intestinal methanogen overgrowth? Or are you dealing with some sort of fungal overgrowth? Because all of this is data, right? This is part of it being a data-driven approach, is we want to know what we're dealing with so that the cocktail of antibiotics that are used are appropriate for your needs, right? If you're dealing with methanogens and you take rifaximin or your doctor just gives you rifaximin, it's not going to give you the relief or the results that you're looking for. And so many people have posted saying that they do an initial treatment, they go through that, they come back, they do another breath test, and now what they're dealing with is actually different. Right now they need to actually deal with candida, or methane went down but hydrogen went up, and it's going to impact what comes next in terms of treatment. And this is where a doctor can really help, is, like I just said, the approach to antibiotic therapy is going to be data driven, but it's also going to be sequential, because the goal here is not to treat and then wait and see, which is oftentimes what happens when people aren't working with a doctor, right? Rather than doing a breath test or something on the back end, the symptoms may be resolved a little bit and they wait some time, and then they see things creeping back up after a couple of weeks or after a couple of months, and then they go through another round of treatment. But that's not what you want to do, right? You don't want to have these big gaps of time in between all of your treatment. You want to be ready to go with a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, right? And know that it might take 3 to 4 rounds with varied antibiotics to actually do the treatment. And so this is one of, the unfortunate side effects of not working with a doctor and not following a systematic protocol, is that you end up with either an incomplete treatment or an ineffective treatment. And on the basis of thinking that the antibiotics didn't work, now you end up going down the rabbit hole of all of these different root causes, rather than staying up here and considering whether the antibiotic therapy that you went through was actually effective and complete. But that's not all, right? Because there's a couple more boxes here, and one is around your medical history. And if you're not working with a doctor, it's going to be difficult to do this, but they're going to want to look into things like, what were the conditions around the onset of your symptoms? Was it related to COVID? Was it related to food poisoning? Was it related to a period of acute stress? Was it on the tails of a different medical condition? Did it happen after some sort of surgery, right? Some sort of medical procedure? All of those things are important and worth considering in terms of what, number one, might be going on in your body, but number two, how to improve things. Because if you have physical obstructions, right, antibiotics may not necessarily be what you need to achieve health. They should also be looking at things like the prescriptions that you're taking right now. Because again, if there's any prescriptions here that are impacting normal healthy digestion or stomach function, those are things that should be considered. And then there's yet another box over here, which is diagnostic testing. Right? So a lot of people end up looking at parasites and heavy metals and nutrient deficiencies and all these other things all the way down the process after they've tried multiple rounds of antibiotics, when they're in their kind of root cause investigative phase. But a doctor, right, if they're following this process, should be looking at things like food sensitivities. They should be looking into, leaky gut, right, or gut permeability. They should be looking into parasites, right? Maybe not for everyone, but based on your history and based on the symptoms that you're presenting with, it makes sense to do a number of testing upfront, because this may inform what you want to do while you're going through your antibiotic therapy, and it may inform what you want to do in parallel with your antibiotic therapy. So I know that there is an awful lot on the board here, but again, going back to two major challenges with the DIY treatment. If you're trying to navigate all of this on your own and become your own SIBO expert, you're bound to fall into some traps. You're bound to fall into some holes. And I share all of this with you because I don't want people suffering longer than they need to suffer. And every single day as I look at these posts, I hear people talking about how they're hopeless, how they're so discouraged, how they're down to eating, just 10 to 12 foods. There's no more joy in eating. They can't go to restaurants. They can't hang out with friends and family. They feel like shit, or they can't reintroduce foods, because when the antibiotic treatment didn't work, the only thing that allows someone oftentimes to improve their symptoms is to continue to pull foods out of their diet. Well, then you end up eating only 10 to 12 foods. And then if you do that for a year, like now you've got nutrient deficiencies. Now you've got other issues going on, and you've created a problem where there wasn't a problem initially. So, like I said, I share all of this because there's big missed opportunities, right? And the big missed opportunities are to go back again and take a look at the first and the second line therapies. Did you go through a phase of really trying to optimize your diet, looking at what you were eating, when you were eating, how you were eating, making sure that you're taking in balanced nutrition? If not, that might be an opportunity. Did you really look at lifestyle? Have you looked at stress? Right? Stress is oftentimes a component of what kicks off SIBO. So going back and revisiting that, have you looked at the pharmaceuticals? Like I said, that's something that a doctor will oftentimes help you with, but you can do some of your own research there, right? And have you tried to optimize healthy routines in your life? And from a digestive standpoint, have you investigated enzymes or pre or probiotics as a way of enhancing your digestion? Right? And maybe none of this stuff feels like a solution now if what you're dealing with is worsening symptoms and some anxiety and maybe even some other chronic illness going on, right? But just because this isn't going to cure all of that doesn't mean this isn't something to be looked at, because these are things that support overall health and well-being. They support the healthy functioning of your body in general, which is going to pay dividends for any sort of treatment and any sort of healing that you need to do along the line. And then as we move down again, right, and not just running through the breath test, a couple rounds of antibiotics, and then getting lost in the world of root cause, if you haven't worked with a qualified physician, there's an opportunity to take a more data-driven approach, make sure that someone's looking at your medical history, and to have an informed expert actually be advising on what other diagnostic tests to do. And this is where you hear so much about functional medicine doctors and naturopathic physicians. Their role is really to help your body to heal by removing the obstacles to healing, rather than to just give you medicines that are going to treat the symptoms that are causing you problems. And so they're going to be much more interested than a conventional doctor in doing all of these things. And then on the basis of these three boxes, then it will move into not just treatment, but really a whole process for treatment. Data-driven. What do we need to treat on the first go around? What do we need to treat on the second go around? What do we need to treat on the third go around? How are we going to adjust the different medicines that we're using? And if you're not tolerating these medicines, right? If the die-off symptoms are kicking your butt, or if you just feel like trash taking some things. I know that when I was trying to take Alamax, right? The Allicin garlic supplement, I felt awful. I couldn't get through a round of doing that. I felt much better taking oregano and berberine. And so if you have a plan, but then you react poorly to it and you can't see it through, circling back to the plan B, C, and D, this is where a doctor can help keep you on your feet, help keep the momentum going so that it's one big, long, continuous push to get rid of the overgrowth, rather than treat and wait, treat and wait, treat and wait, which wastes time and doesn't really get you the results that you're looking for. And then potentially the biggest benefit is that you don't end up too far down this rabbit hole where you end up with the stress, the anxiety, and the depression, because this makes everything worse. And what so many people are talking about is it started with SIBO and now it's turned into other symptoms. Now my life feels like it's washed up on the rocks, and now I've got other chronic illness that's cropping up, right? I've got rheumatoid arthritis, or I've got histamine issues, I've got MCAS, I've got all these other conditions, which if you do the research on a lot of those, you'll see that stress is an underlying component in a lot of that. And so anxiety is daily stress. Depression is daily stress. And if this has taken root in your life, now, I've talked about this in another video, like if you do end up treating your SIBO, hopefully this will resolve. But if you've developed a lot of anxiety around food and a lot of anxiety around your health, and a lot of anxiety around being medicalized, and a lot of your relationships that were supportive in your life have kind of like fallen into the background as a result of everything going on with SIBO. Curing the SIBO may not necessarily resolve these issues. You may have some outstanding mental health issues that deserve working on their own. So my encouragement through all of this is to think about your own journey. Think about where you're at. Where were you 3 months ago? Where were you 6 months ago? Where were you 12 months ago in this journey? And where do you see yourself today? And if you recognize that you have skipped some steps that seem or feel like they were pretty important along the way, if you feel like you're absolutely drowning down here looking for a root cause on your own on the basis of internet research, and you want to take a step back and you want to talk to someone about what your opportunities are to take a more holistic approach that looks at more than just a couple of rounds of antibiotics and now a chase for the root cause, reach out to me and let me know. This is part of what I do. I don't want to see people suffering with SIBO for any longer than they need to. Again, I dealt with my own SIBO for 7 years. And when I dealt, again, just speaking from my own experience, when I truly dealt with the anxiety that was carving me up inside, it took about 6 months to resolve that. And it also resolved my SIBO. So I made very little progress over 6.5 years. And in fact, I got increasingly worse. Well, and to the point where I was just comfortable with my discomfort, but I certainly wasn't moving in the direction of healing. And then boom, when I found something, it really moved things in the right direction. So thanks for your attention today, and be well. I'll talk to you soon.